Nintendo's announcement of the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Plus service in 2021 was one of the most despised videos posted on YouTube of all time. According to JonTron and his crack team of researchers, it is, or was, among the 10 most downvoted videos ever uploaded to the platform, which is really shocking with how much absolute trash gets uploaded to YouTube on a daily basis. Well, now no one except creators can see how much other viewers hate a particular video, so you all can rest assured that in the future you'll be forced to read all of the negative comments instead, until of course those are taken away too, at which point maybe we'll start making moves towards other platforms, or we'll just log off and play Elden Ring. Man, that game is so freaking cool. Anyway, basically all that happened was that Nintendo fans wanted to send a message that they were unhappy with Nintendo's Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Plus Deluxe Edition. They hated the $50 annual fee. They hated the sloppy emulation of N64 games. They hated the lack of new content, the connectivity issues, and they even hated its dad, the Wii Shop, which ran out on us all years ago. It's gotten really bitter around here, and we're pissed. But lost in all of this weeping and gnashing of teeth has been any consideration of the fact that Nintendo Switch Online now grants users access to a small library of classic Sega Genesis games. 18 games in fact, and that the emulation is being handled by the experienced and much celebrated M2, the same company that worked on the emulation of the Sega Genesis Mini and the Wii Virtual Console. So emulation ought to be pretty good, but probably never good enough.
Nothing beats original hardware. Nothing. Rawr.
Be gone, foul monster! So how good is this collection of Genesis games? And how does it stack up to the Genesis collection for the Switch? Or the Genesis Mini? Is it worth it? Well, since we're certified official Sega Genesis experts with over 40 years of experience, let us fill you in. So sit back, relax, pop open a beer, grab a gluten-free bean burger, say hi to your neighbors, crochet a scarf for your cat, and enjoy this video as we explore every Genesis game on the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Service Plus. The Nintendo Switch Online Genesis Collection has only 18 games so far, but I can tell you, just by looking, there's virtually no filler here. Let's look at each one moving from top to bottom and right to left. First off is Altered Beast from 1989. This is a home port of a relatively popular late 80s arcade game that served as the original pack-in for the Sega Genesis. Therefore, for many people, including myself, this was the first Genesis game that they ever played, and it's for this reason that the game is essential. Today, Altered Beast is frequently derided for its simple side-scrolling beat-em-up gameplay and appalling brevity. The game can easily be beaten in less than 20 minutes, but if you were around in 1989, you may remember having to change your underwear after seeing these massive sprites and hearing that incredible Yamaha sound chip on your dad's wood-paneled TV. I still like this, and I don't care if I can beat it in less than 20 minutes, because that's honestly probably more time than I've got anyway. I appreciate any game that lets me be a word dragon for any amount of time. Of course, it's even better with a friend or any random children that you've got laying around. Just be sure to check everyone's underwear when you're finished. Next is Castlevania Bloodlines from 1994. An overlooked yet exceptional representation of traditional Castlevania platforming that has, in recent years, become available across a wide variety of formats. It's on Konami's Castlevania collection, it's on the Genesis Mini, and now it's here too. And what a wonderful thing, because this is one of the greatest Castlevania games ever made, with stunning graphics, great music, fun and challenging levels, and a choice of 2 different characters with unique moves and playstyles. This is also one of the hardest Castlevania games ever made, so it might take you a while to get through it, or you can just use save states, which are pretty easy to use with the Nintendo Switch Online. Now I can make progress without having to restart the entire level, and that's a thing of beauty. Castlevania Bloodlines, dudes! It's one of the best action platformers ever made for the Genesis. Next is Gunstar Heroes, a fantastic run-and-gun developed by Treasure and originally released for the Sega Genesis in 1993. This is a frantic and challenging game that offers a lot of different ways to play while simultaneously subverting expectations of the genre. You choose a starting weapon in your preferred playing style. Do you prefer to stand and shoot from a fixed position? Or would you rather run it and gun it, pop it and lock it, or scoot it and shoot it, stand and deliver, or rush and crush? Either way, the choice is yours, dude. You even get to pick one of 4 different starting levels, which can be played in any order, and each of which is radically different from the others. So despite the fact that this game can chew you up like bubblegum the first time you play it, it's still impossible to complain because even if you lose, you get infinite continues, and you can switch over to another level with different game mechanics and style. Don't like hand-to-hand combat? Then why not try this choo-choo train level? Talk about a rail shooter. Get it? Rail shooter? Whoa! Many people regard Gunstar Heroes as one of the best Sega Genesis games ever made, and I happen to agree with them. You can play it with a friend, you can judo throw bad guys, the boss fights are fun and crazy, and it plays well on the Nintendo Switch Online service. Just forget about the D-pad on the Joy-Cons. Those suck. You're definitely gonna need an alternative controller for this one, though the analog stick on any controller is also good, if you prefer that. Next is Shinobi III, Return of the Ninja Master, also from 1993, and it's an amazing sequel to The Revenge of Shinobi, which is itself one of the best games on the Sega Genesis. So yes, Shinobi 3 is one of those too. It's one of the best games on the Genesis kind of game. Once again, you take control of Joe Musashi, the baddest character that Sega ever created, and he has a bunch of cool new moves he can do. Now you can run. Now you can run and slash. Of course, you can double jump, and you can still do that amazing spinning shuriken attack from Revenge of Shinobi. Of course, melee attacks are a big part of Shinobi, as is throwing shurikens at enemies. But now you can do wall jumps, cling to the ceiling, and you can do a surprisingly useful and fun jump kick. The controls in this game are pretty much flawless. Just make sure you get a better controller. Gameplay wise, this is the easiest Shinobi game that I have ever played. So instead of being damn near impossible or incredibly difficult, Shinobi 3 is merely pretty tough, but always interesting. Did you know you get to ride a horse in this game? It's true, and Shinobi can do water sports too. For me, the only letdown is that the music, while good, was not done by Yuzo Koshiro, who did the incredible Revenge of Shinobi, which might still be my all-time favorite game soundtrack. Anyway, Shinobi 3 is fantastic, and it's a great part of the Switch Online collection. Next is Dynamite Heady, yet another critically acclaimed, graphically impressive game by Treasure that was originally released late in 1994. And boy, I really hate this game. Why? Because it frustrates me with the way it wastes my time. First of all, the game opens with a lengthy, unskippable cutscene. Sure, you can move your character sprite around and pretend to attack this robot, but there's no real point. You can't die. You can't really hurt it. Then, before you have the chance to get familiar with the game's mechanics, you're thrust into a real boss fight with a cat. And then the game starts. Actually, no. You've got to go through a series of really long, boring mini-games meant to teach you the game's mechanics. Wow. No way, dude. You know how Storytelling 101 teaches us to avoid exposition so we don't bore the audience? Well, Good Game Design 101 clearly states in Chapter 2, Article 4, Paragraph 1, and I quote, "Just let the player figure this shit out on their own. Don't force me to use my head to play basketball until I eventually make enough lucky baskets to end this misery. Set me free to explore your zany levels. I'll figure out how to bop my head around to do all this neat stuff. I could be ghouls and ghosts, dude. This ain't my first rodeo." Everything about this game annoys me. The abrasive and loud music and sound effects, the wacky cartoon world with its cluttered environments, and the fact that there are yet even more of these long, boring mini-games. Add to that my belief that this game has shockingly bad hit detection for a game that requires you to throw a projectile, and the usual problems with the Switch controller, and you have a recipe for a dynamite headache. See what I did there? That made it funny. Dynamite Heady makes a lot of top Genesis game lists, but I call bullshit. This is an ambitious and technically impressive game for sure, but it plays like garbage. Next is Contra Hardcore, an old-school arcade-style run-and-gun by the grandmasters of the genre, Konami. Originally released in August of 1994, Contra Hardcore sort of looks like it was released in 1987 on hardware that wouldn't be available until roughly 1999. That is to say, the game looks awesome, but the character sprites are some amazingly cheesy sci-fi movie stereotypes. What is this thing, a Wookiee? And a girl? Actually, I really like the girl character because I like to pretend she's Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. I wanna rock! Yeah! As you might expect from Konami during this period, Contra Hardcore is a well-crafted, visually impressive ball breaker of a game that forces you to memorize every level in order to survive the many inventive enemies and obstacles thrown your way. Hardcore is the perfect name for this, and the stiff difficulty is not for everybody. You only get a few lives to sustain one-hit deaths in an environment where basically everything that moves wants to kill you. It's like high school, except unlike high school, you get 4 continues. And then it's all the way back to the beginning, baby. Thankfully, with Nintendo Switch Online, you can conveniently use save states anytime you like, and if you're strategic with them, then this game becomes much easier to get through. And if you like action games like this, then you might enjoy getting through this excellent game multiple times, since it offers branching paths and multiple endings. Next is Musha, a great early 90s vertical scrolling shooter by Compile that makes a fantastic addition to Nintendo Switch Online for 2 reasons. 1, this game was not released in the West in large quantities and has become a valuable collector's item, meaning getting an actual physical copy of this game is basically impossible for most people. 2, this is the first game on the Nintendo Switch Online that isn't actually already available on the Sega Genesis Mini or the Sega Genesis Classics collection, meaning that this is the first time the game has been published for official access in the West since it showed up on the Wii Virtual Console in 2009. Is Musha worth the wait? Well, if you like vertical scrolling shooters, then unequivocally yes. This is one of the best vertical scrolling shooters ever made for the Sega Genesis. As with most compile shooters, this game starts off with a level of difficulty that's fun and accessible for all skill levels. And like all compile shooters, there are a ton of cool power-ups to constantly juggle that will give you insane firepower and grant you a megalomaniacal rush of ecstasy. This is how Julius Caesar felt when he conquered Gaul. Also, this is a game that actually greatly benefits from being played with an analog stick as opposed to a D-pad. So I don't actually hate the Switch controller for this. So far, Musha is far and away the best thing going for Nintendo Switch Online's Genesis library. This is a standout title for sure. Next, let's look at the one and only Sonic game included with Nintendo Switch Online, Sonic 2, which was released late in 1992. Obviously, including a Sonic game is obligatory, but given that Sega is currently developing a compilation of all the Sonic games made for the Genesis, it's understandable why they wouldn't want to just repeat the same trick here, but if I had to pick one essential Sonic game, then it really would be Sonic 2, which I think may be the best Sonic game ever made that isn't Sonic Mania. Sure, you're still going to suffer that traditional run-and-stop gameplay that's inherent in every game that brashly attempts to combine an emphasis on speedrunning with a 90s side-scrolling platformer, but at least the frustration here is of the most polished variety. Sonic 2 might be one of the 5 most beautiful games on the Sega Genesis, and it was, in its time, a must-play that went very far in establishing Sega as being truly one of the greatest game makers of all time. In its day, this was the one and only Mario killer, and sure, if I'm being honest, I prefer Super Mario World's deeper gameplay and emphasis on discovery, but if you give Sonic 2 a chance, it'll take a hold of you and remain with you for years to come. It's basically the herpes of classic Sega games, and a lot like herpes, sometimes the risk just seems like it's worth it. It seems that way, dudes. There's a lot more that can go wrong when it comes to getting a case of herpes. But I'm not gonna preach about why I value chastity and monogamy. All I'll say is that you could do worse than end up with a little Sonic 2 on your face. And given how prevalent Sonic 2 is, there's a good chance that, like herpes, you've already got it anyway. Next is the Sword of Vermilion, a very early fantasy RPG that was developed by the legendary Yu Suzuki and his AM2 team at Sega, the same team that made Outrun, Virtual Fighter, and many other arcade super hits. Also made an RPG? Yes, indeed. In fact, they made 2 of them, both based on the same engine, though sadly Rent a Hero, the other game in question, was never released outside of Japan. But thanks be to Sega, the Sword of Vermilion was, and it's a very odd game that I absolutely love, and which you might actually hate. For being developed by AM2, this is not a very attractive game, nor is it very detailed, nor does it provide a vast epic world to explore or a rich narrative full of interesting characters. Rather, this is a basic first-person perspective dungeon crawler with overhead perspective towns to visit in between levels. Sword of Vermilion also switches to an overhead perspective for action-based battles that are triggered quite frequently through random encounters. The fighting mechanics are rudimentary. You attack with the C button while avoiding contact with enemy sprites and projectiles. The sword doesn't even really swing all that well, and with a heavy emphasis on grinding and leveling up, you're going to be spending a lot of time in this mode of gameplay. All of that probably sounds very dull and tedious, and it probably is. But what you have to understand is that I am highly neurotic and have an obsessive personality. So for me, the meticulously repeating flow of progression as I upgrade my magic, weapons, and armor, explore new caves, visit new towns that all look the same, fight the occasional epic side view boss fight, it's all quite satisfying and addictive. Plus, this game has an absolutely gorgeous soundtrack that stirs my soul and imagination even when I'm no longer playing the game, even when I'm at the grocery store. Next is Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, a Western reskin of the Japanese Chigyu masterpiece Puyo Puyo, which was released in 1993. This is an obligatory block-dropping puzzle game that has the player lining up colored beans in order to cause them to burst, so that you can clear the screen. It's good, clean, old-fashioned Chigyu fun. Setting this game apart slightly is an emphasis on head-to-head competition that has two players, either Chigyu or CPU controlled, lining up the same colored beans side by side on their own boards, in a totally fun way, with the goal of outlasting each other. The player who can keep their board from reaching the top by bursting their beans the most efficiently wins. An added layer of strategy is derived from the fact that bubbles are dropped on your opponent to punish them and impede their progress whenever you burst a particularly large set of beans, or multiple colored sets, at the same time. If this description was remotely interesting to you, then you'll probably enjoy this fun, family-friendly puzzle game that continues to be one of Sega's go-to franchises to this very day. It's cheesy and beefy at the same time. Next is Phantasy Star 4, the monumental conclusion of the Phantasy Star space saga that originated on the Sega Master System way back in 1987. This massive adventure was released at the end of 1993, and it came in a shitty red cardboard box, while also costing a whopping $100 at retail, which is roughly $8 billion today, adjusting for inflation. I remember the day I bought it at Target. The guy working in the electronics department that unlocks the glass case thought I was either crazy or maybe that I was gonna try and rob the place. You want what? A Phantasy Star? Huh? But this is $100 for a video game? Let me check and see if this is okay. Do you have a permission slip from your parents, Sonny? This game was worth every penny. Phantasy Star 4 is a beautifully crafted, well-written fantasy adventure with a lot to explore and many genuinely fun and interesting characters. It's heavily illustrated, has great music, and features fair and balanced gameplay. It is legitimately one of the single best RPGs of the 16-bit generation, and it's every bit as good as Final Fantasy on the Super Nintendo. Personally, from that same time period, I only prefer Chrono Trigger to this. Phantasy Star 4 still suffers from the usual limitations of a Japanese RPG, but somehow this suffers a lot less. There are many side quests, there's space travel between several different planets, tons of beautiful manga, and 10 playable characters that all have their own subplots and backgrounds. It's got great moments that'll make you laugh, it's got moments that'll make you cry. I love this game, and it's probably my favorite Sega Genesis game of all time. And then there was Streets of Rage 2, probably my second favorite Genesis game of all time. This masterpiece was developed in part by Yuzo Koshiro and his development studio Ancient, which is really just himself, his mother, and his sister Ayano, who drew all of the game's characters while her brother wrote all of the music. That's really incredible, and beautiful to think about. The original Streets of Rage was a side-scrolling beat-em-up that took its cues from Capcom's popular Final Fight, but which also somehow managed to outclass its source material with tight, fast-paced gameplay and one of the best video game soundtracks of all time. Again, thanks to Yuzo Koshiro. Streets of Rage 2 is more of all that, but with much better graphics, more wonderful music, and controls and moves that were so fun that the recent Streets of Rage 4 game game was based entirely upon them. In my opinion, Streets of Rage 2 is the best side-scrolling beat-em-up from the 16-bit era, and may in fact be the greatest side-scrolling beat-em-up of all time. It's odd that they skipped over the original Streets of Rage here, but understandable at the same time, if you're familiar with how great this game is. Next is Thunder Force 2, a tough-as-nails, old-timey space shooter that was one of the original launch titles for the Sega Genesis in the summer of 1989. If you watched the Shmup Junkie, then you probably already played and thoroughly enjoyed this fun shooter. But if you're not already into these types of games, then not only will Thunder Force 2 fail to make you into a believer, but it will crush you like a Dixie cup in the hands of a strong 11-year-old boy. Prepare to be smashed in this marathon of an open level that opts for a confusing overhead perspective on a grid-based map. Fly through a series of gated areas and destroy ground targets. And once that's done, it's time for the more familiar side-scrolling stages, and prepare to be destroyed by the swarms of fast-moving enemies that shoot endless bullets. Do you love that new power-up? Well, too bad, buddy. You're dead, and you've lost all of your weapons. Thankfully, not only has Thunder Force 2 greatly improved with the analog stick, but now you can use save states and time reversal, which means you're gonna get to see level 3, baby! Most people will not like this game, but I love it. Next is Echo the Dolphin, a game that was released in 1993 and was a major part of Sega of America's identity during the height of the popularity of the Genesis. Echo was featured heavily in magazine covers, talked about in the gaming press, and endlessly praised by professional game critics for the game's beautiful graphics, haunting music, and unique underwater theme. Too bad Echo the Dolphin actually sucks. Echo the Dolphin is quite possibly the single most overrated game on the Sega Genesis. It featured baffling level designs, tons of monotony, frustrating, borderline broken game mechanics. Plus, you play as a cute dolphin that shoots sonar at magical crystals. What is this whack-job new age shit? Are you kidding me? What's with LSD-crazed boomers and crystals anyway? Why did they forsake the traditions of their fathers for this? Anyway, Echo was actually developed in Hungary by Appaloosa Interactive, the makers of Cyborg Justice and the Magic School Bus space exploration game. If Echo was actually any good, then it was Appaloosa's one good game. But guess what? It wasn't. It was just like all their other games. Trash. Next is Ristar, which has the exact opposite problem of Echo the Dolphin, in that it's a fantastic game that was completely overlooked in its time, and therefore isn't really part of people's nostalgia for Sega. Ristar is a wonderful side-scrolling platformer with beautiful graphics, an interesting soundtrack, original gameplay mechanics, excellent level designs, and legitimately fun and challenging boss fights. I personally think this is the best mascot-styled platforming game on the Genesis, and I think it's even more fun to play than Sonic 2. And it's probably my third favorite Genesis game of all time, but the game had two problems. One, Ristar was released in February of 1995, months after the ill-fated 32X, and just before the launch of the Saturn and the Sony PlayStation. People really did stop buying Sega games in 1995. 2, the game critics never gave this game a fair shake, giving the game pretty modest scores in the 70s and 80s out of 100, and frequently comparing Ristar to Dynamite Heady for some reason, to which this game bears absolutely no resemblance. I think critics in the gaming press had shifted their focus and mentality almost entirely to the next generation of games, and so a traditional platformer on the Genesis must have seemed mundane to them. Except these were the same assholes that gave perfect scores to Donkey Kong Country a few months prior. What a difference a few months can make. Ristar deserves more credit than it gets, and it's a great addition to the Nintendo Switch Online. Next is Jam and Earl, an inventive roguelike dungeon crawler from 1991 that ditched the medieval setting of most dungeon crawlers in favor of a funky, fresh 90s cartoon adventure that would have fit in perfectly with Nickelodeon during its golden years. You, and preferably a friend, take control of Jam and Earl, a couple of rapping space aliens that have crashed on a comedic caricature of Earth. And now they have to find all of the missing parts of their spaceship in order to go home to the planet Funkatron. Together, they will have to explore 25 tiered levels, which are accessed, of course, by taking an elevator. Jam and Earl includes many special items that come in the form of presents that can either help or hurt you, and the creatures of Earth are just as variable. Some seem to basically do nothing, like the hula girl, who temporarily distracts the aliens. Others are helpful, like the wise man, who can identify your presents for you. And yet others, like the crazed shopper or the hamster ball, will just right out flatten you. Every time you play, Earth's 25 levels are procedurally generated, so no two playthroughs are ever the same. But the real magic of Jam and Earl comes in playing with a friend, preferably under the influence of pizza. Also, this is yet another game that is actually improved with the use of an analog stick, so there is that advantage with the Switch. I've always loved this quirky game. It's a true Sega classic. Next is Golden Axe, a seminal Sega classic that came to the Genesis in December of 1989 and was probably the most important game for the console until Sonic the Hedgehog. This was the original killer app for the Genesis, and it's the reason our family got one in the first place. That and the fact that Toys R Us was sold out of Nintendos. The most popular arcade genre of the late 80s and early 90s was the side-scrolling beat-em-up. And while Nintendo ported the incredibly popular Double Dragon, Sega's beat-em-up was literally on steroids. Just look at these monster sprites by comparison. These crude dudes are huge! And even better, they're fully armed, with fantasy weapons, like the +5 whack-a-mole hammer, or this +10 broadsword of doom. Too bad your character's sword is so tiny and wimpy by comparison. And where in the heck is the Golden Axe anyway? The dwarf has an axe, both final bosses have an axe, but at no point is there ever a Golden Axe. However, I will say that in this game, you've got to stop skeletons from fighting, and you also have to mount these fire-breathing velociraptors, which at the time was one of the best things to ever happen in a video game. And if you were a Dungeons & Dragons kid, or Conan the Barbarian was your favorite movie, then this game was a dream come true. It even featured a village full of screaming hobbits being massacred by medieval chicks with axes. I'm pretty sure that Tolkien would have hated that, but personally, I think it's hilarious. Anyway, time has taken its toll on this game, which can be a little wonky or clunky in the control department. But once you realize the only two moves you really want to be doing are the tackle and jump attack, then you'll do just fine. In fact, for this review, I played Golden Axe for the first time in probably 5 years and beat it. And so too can you, and preferably with a friend. But the real star of this game is the amazing soundtrack. This is still a must-listen Genesis game. Next is Shining Force, a 1992 game that brilliantly combined the best elements of character-driven RPGs and adventure games with some of the simplest elements of tactical strategy RPGs. The result is a charming game that exudes intense personality and serves as an accessible starting point for initiating the slightly mental pastime of pretending to be Napoleon Bonaparte. Each unit in your own personal Continental Army has a personality, a backstory, and a reason for fighting by your side that transcends mere conscription or mercenary intentions. Each battle you fight is a new chapter in an unfolding fantasy tale about bad guys trying to resurrect their darkness god so that they can rule the world. It's not exactly the best tale ever told, but it's coherent, has fun characters, twists, and sufficient drama to be interesting. But what really sets Shining Force apart is its unique emphasis on exploration and discovery. Within the tactical RPG framework, every new town is an opportunity to explore, discover backstory, and sometimes just goof around. Your curiosity is often rewarded with hidden gags, and even new chances to find new and secret characters who will join your army of cute-looking anime sprites. While the turn-based battles themselves can be quite long, anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, they're also escapable, repeatable, and even grindable if you're outmatched, and prefer to crush your enemies as opposed to outsmarting them. I mean, this isn't exactly a deep strategy game, but it helps to think about the strengths and weaknesses of your characters. Keep your archers in the back, and take advantage of their ranged attacks. Protect your front lines with strong fighters, and support them with healers. It's simple fun for all ages and skill levels. Aside from clunky item management, Shining Force remains one of the best games ever made for the Sega Genesis, especially for RPG lovers. After Phantasy Star 4, this is the must-play RPG for the Sega Genesis. Next we have Strider, a 1990 port of Capcom's impressive side-scrolling action platformer that was originally released in arcades in the spring of 1989. As with all of the early Capcom ports on the Genesis, this game was actually produced internally by Sega with Capcom's blessing. And boy, did they do an incredible job with this, because this was far and away the best way to play Strider outside of an arcade. The graphics and music are phenomenal, but many people may be turned off by this game's high difficulty, occasional slowdown, and sprite flicker. I'm not one of those people though. In 1990, I would have told you that this was in fact my favorite game of all time. And on top of that, I must admit that I used to pretend that Strider was a Star Wars game. Strider here used slash attack? That's a lightsaber. These enemies here? These were stormtroopers, I guess. The robot helper power-ups you can get? That's obviously R2-D2. This shadowy cloaked figure? It's the Emperor from Return of the Jedi. This mini-boss with a jetpack? That's obviously Boba Fett. This giant floating ball boss fight? That's the Death Star. These flying helicopter things? I don't know. Speeder bikes? So I guess that makes these Amazon chicks in the dinosaur level Ewoks? Yes, those were Ewoks. Can you imagine how much better the Return of the Jedi would have been if instead of cuddly teddy bears, the Ewoks had been a race of hot Amazon women? Holy cow, it would have been the greatest movie of all time. Today, Strider is not my favorite arcade game of all time. In fact, it's not even my favorite Sega Genesis game either, but I still enjoy playing it, and I admire the incredible amount of variety and detail that was put into every level. This moment right here where you run down the side of this snow-covered mountain that's covered in landmines, and which ends by flipping through the air over a chasm, this is truly an inspired moment of greatness and honestly should be an official event at the Winter Olympics. And it's one reason why I think Strider is yet another wonderful addition to Nintendo Switch Online's Genesis collection. So that's all 18 Genesis games on Nintendo Switch Online. Oh, wait, what's this? This just in. We've sat on this video so long that Nintendo actually unveiled even more? Well, let's take a quick look at the 6 newest additions. First off is Super Fantasy Zone, a phenomenal remaster of Sega's arcade classic shoot-'em-up that was developed by Sunsoft and released exclusively in Japan and Europe in 1992. That's right, Super Fantasy Zone was not available in North America, which is a real shame because it's one of the best shooters for the console that's already stacked with great shooters. The game plays smooth and fast, but I do wish your pea shooter fired a little bit more rapidly. This is yet another great addition to the Nintendo Switch Online Genesis library. Next is Light Crusader, yet another great game by Treasure, and in my opinion, the best action RPG available for the Sega Genesis. Released late in 1995, Light Crusader was barely noticed by anyone, but now's your chance to visit the mysterious castle town of Green Row and solve the mystery of the disappearing townsfolk. While you'll probably be turned off by Light Crusader's wonky, isometric presentation and hilariously bad animations, like Sir David's ridiculous sword swing, this game offers a lot more than meets the eye, with a satisfying magic system that lets you mix and match elemental powers to create new attacks, puzzles galore, and in true Treasure fashion, badass boss fights. Light Crusader lacks Zelda's polish, but it's basically heavy metal when it comes to the fun balance of insane combat and tricky problem solving. It could be the gemmiest of all hidden gems for the Sega Genesis. Next is Alien Soldier, a highly original, graphically stunning run-and gun developed once again by Treasure and released exclusively in Japan in 1995, the same year that saw the release of the Sega Saturn. Alien Soldier has long been celebrated as being perhaps the single greatest Mega Drive game to never get a US release. And I won't argue with that claim here, but I will say that Alien Soldier isn't for everybody. The sprites are huge and detailed, but the game's environments are cramped and difficult to navigate, and the control scheme is one of the most complex ever produced for the console. Alien Soldier is a very hard game, but almost all of its difficulty comes from the stiff learning curve required to master the controls. Still, this is yet another impressive addition to Nintendo Switch Online's Sega Genesis library. Next is Space Harrier 2, a launch game for the Mega Drive in 1988 and the Sega Genesis in 1989. It is intended to be a sequel to the popular Space Harrier arcade game by Yu Suzuki and Sega AM2. It sucks. A lot. As one of the first Genesis games ever made, it's kind of interesting. But I'd rather mow the lawn than play Space Harrier 2. It's that bad. Next is Sonic Spinball, a rushed Sonic the Hedgehog-based pinball game that was created as a holdover for the delayed Sonic 3, the Christmas of 1993. Sonic Spinball features beautiful sprites, a cool soundtrack, at least as far as that first level is concerned, and a distractingly choppy frame rate. Further, success in this game seems to depend a lot on luck. I really don't like it, and neither do a lot of people. But finally, Nintendo Switch Online Plus features Shining Force 2. The 1994 sequel to the original Shining Force is a whole lot like the original. That is to say, it's a great strategy RPG with beautiful artwork. This game allows you to backtrack and explore the open world, in addition to being a bit longer and more complex. This is easily one of the best games on the Genesis, and it's arguably the greatest game in the long-running Shining series. And there you have it. These are the Sega Genesis games of the Nintendo Switch Online. Plus, not only do you get these 24 amazing games, well, at least mostly amazing games, but these are all emulated exceptionally well. None of the common complaints associated with emulation were present for us here. We experienced no discernible glitches, audio errors, frame rate issues, and no input delays or lag. Nothing. Nada. Zilch. For me, as far as I can tell, these play as well as I remember playing them as a teenager. The only real drawback is that the Switch controller is awful, and even the Pro controller doesn't really have a great D-pad. At least not my crappy knockoff Pro controller. On the other hand, as we've said, some of these games are actually better with an analog stick. Thunder Force 2, Jam and Earl, Ristar, Contra Hardcore, Gunstar Heroes, Alien Soldier, and Super Fantasy Zone all felt much better when played with an analog stick. But does the Sega Genesis as part of Nintendo Switch Online make the $50 annual fee worth the cost of the service? That's really up to you, whatever $50 means to you, as well as a consideration of how much you like N64 games. I will say that, in my opinion, the criticism of Nintendo Switch Online has been a bit overblown, and that we've had a good experience with the included games so far, including a playthrough Paper Mario, and a little bit of time with Majora's Mask. Some of the graphical issues with water textures and fog effects have been fixed by Nintendo, and I don't see why the situation won't continue to improve into the future. If you're into retro gaming and you don't want to pirate games, or you can't afford real hardware, or you don't want to collect piles of mini consoles, then a service like Nintendo Switch Online is actually a great deal. $50 a year isn't that much to pay for access to a library of games this expansive. It's not even possible to play them all in a year, and many, like our old friend Musha here, are so expensive that this is the only practical way to play some of these games, for most people. Our family's gotten a lot out of the Nintendo Switch Online Plus. We love those N64 games, the Genesis is one of my all-time favorite consoles, and my oldest daughter loves Animal Crossing and Mario Kart. But you might be different. Either way, the service keeps getting better. We know they're adding Gameboy Advance and probably GameCube games in the future. Let's just hope it doesn't keep getting more expensive too. So anyway, what do you all think of Nintendo Switch Online and the Sega Genesis? Do you love the collection of games? Honestly, I think this is one of the best Genesis collections out there. Does this make you want the service? Is $50 too much? And what games would you like to see added in the future? Please let us know all of this and more in the comments. And thank you very much for watching. Later, dudes!